The gala at the Willard Grand was all crystal and black tie, a symphony of discreet wealth where the bids were supposed to be polite, and the battles were fought with checkbooks, not calloused hands. Ethan Cole stood at the back in clean jeans and work boots, every penny of his savings a physical weight in his pocket, staring at the one item no one else wanted, the literacy program for his daughter's failing school. He was a single father, a carpenter, with $37,000, everything he had, while the CEOs around him saw the lot as another line on a philanthropic resume. But for Ethan, this wasn't charity. It was the exact price of a miracle that had already happened, one he was prepared to pay for again, for every child who came after his daughter. And when the auctioneer finally called for an opening bid, the silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of a room about to learn what a thing is actually worth. Ethan Cole's world was measured in linear feet and quarterly bills, in the weight of a framing hammer and the quiet of a house after his daughter, Chloe, was finally asleep. At 34, he had the permanent tan of a job site and hands that knew the grain of every common board. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years earlier, a swift and brutal pancreatic cancer that left him with a 4-year-old, a mortgage, and a silence so profound it had its own texture. Grief, he learned, was also a kind of work. You showed up for it every day, you carried its weight, and some days you just didn't get to set it down. Chloe was 7 now. She had Sarah's wide, serious eyes and a mind that latched onto stories with the tenacity of a barnacle. But the letters on the page, they swam. They reversed themselves. They became a frustrating code she couldn't crack, while her classmates at Maplewood Elementary began to sail ahead. The school's one reading specialist, a patient woman named Mrs. Green, had identified it as dyslexia early, but Maplewood's budget had been cut so many times it was more suggestion than document. The intensive, one-on-one literacy program that could rewire Chloe's brain cost $37,000 a year to run for the 12 kids who needed it. The district had zeroed it out. For Ethan, the number wasn't an abstraction. It was the exact sum he had managed to save, dollar by painstaking dollar, since Sarah's death. It lived in a savings account labeled Chloe Future. It was for college, for emergency, for the terrifying possibility of a what-if in a life with no net. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He patched his own jeans. Every financial decision for 3 years had filtered through one question: is this for her future? The $37,000 was the answer, over and over again. Maplewood's principal, Maria Alvarez, fought with the desperation of someone who saw childhood slipping through bureaucratic cracks. She found a loophole. A private charity, the Lambert Foundation, was hosting its annual Future City Gala at the Willard Grand Hotel. The foundation would auction off donated experiences and fund specific community projects. If a project didn't meet its reserve bid, the money would roll into the foundation's general fund. Principal Alvarez submitted the literacy program as a lot. It was the only item on the docket that wasn't a vacation home stay, a round of golf with a retired athlete, or a naming right. It was, as one foundation board member later admitted, the vegetable plate at a steak dinner. Ethan only knew about it because he'd been part of the crew that renovated the Willard's ballroom the previous summer. The foreman, as a thank you, had given him a spare invitation. Black tie optional, it said. Ethan owned a white button-down, one pair of dark jeans without paint stains, and his brown work boots, polished to a dull sheen with a rag and some saddle soap. He went not as a donor, but as a ghost, to see the room finished, to see the people who would decide his daughter's fate. The ballroom was a cathedral of other people's money. Chandeliers dripped light onto gowns that cost more than his truck. The air smelled of perfume, seared scallops, and the quiet hum of power. He stood at the back, near the service doors, a silhouette against the opulence. He watched as lots 1 through 9 sailed past, fueled by polite, competitive nods between tables. A CEO of a local tech firm won a wine tour in Napa for $22,000. A real estate developer's wife secured a private concert for $45,000. Then the auctioneer, a woman in an emerald gown named Anya, moved to the final lot. Her voice, previously bright and sales-minded, shifted into a more formal, almost apologetic register. Lot 10, she announced. A 1-year renewal of the Maplewood Elementary Intensive Literacy Program. This will provide daily specialized instruction for 12 first and second grade students identified with learning differences. The reserve bid is $37,000. She paused. The pause was a little too long. A server clinked a glass at the back of the room. Someone coughed. The screen behind her showed a simple graphic, an open book, a child's drawing of a rainbow. It looked cheap next to the glossy photos of Tuscan villas. Ethan's heart was a drum in his throat. He had practiced this moment in his truck 100 times. He would raise his numbered paddle, the one he'd gotten at the door, just high enough to be seen. He would set the price. He would own the miracle. He would save it. Anya opened the floor. Do I have an opening bid of 37,000? Silence, not just quiet, but a thick, palpable silence of a room collectively deciding something was not worth the price of admission. Ethan saw the CEOs glance down at their desserts. He saw a woman in diamonds make a subtle, let's move on gesture to her husband. For them, it was an inefficient donation. For him, it was Chloe's voice, finally confident, reading him a bedtime story. His arm felt like lead. He willed it to move. And from the front, a paddle went up. A man in a flawless tuxedo, whose company logo was on the program as a platinum sponsor, gave a slight, almost bored wave. I have 37,000, Anya said, relief coloring her tone. Thank you, sir. Do I have 40? Ethan's breath caught. This wasn't the script. The sponsor was supposed to be the safety net, the one who bid to avoid the embarrassment of a lot failing, not to actually win it. It was a tax write-off, a line in an annual report, but a bid was a bid. The program was now in play. Ethan's paddle, laminated card number 117, rose from the shadows at the back of the room. He didn't wave it. He just held it up, steady as a post in the ground. A ripple went through the crowd. Heads turned, not the polite turns of earlier, but the sharp, curious turns of people noticing an anomaly. Who was that at the back? Anya squinted, spotting him. I have 40,000 from paddle 117 in the rear. The CEO at the front half turned, a mild frown on his face. He gave his paddle a casual flick. 45,000, Anya called. Ethan didn't hesitate. His paddle was up again before she finished the number. The money in his account was a solid block. 37,000 was the price. Every dollar over was a theft from Chloe's future, a shorter safety net. But he had run the numbers in the dark for weeks. He could go to 50. He could drain the account to zero. It would mean no college fund, no cushion. It would mean terror. It would also mean Chloe could read. 50,000, he said. His voice, rough from job site dust and disuse, cut through the polite atmosphere. He hadn't meant to speak aloud. The CEO's frown deepened. This was becoming a distraction. He conferred briefly with a woman next to him, then raised his paddle with a definitive, closing gesture. 60,000, Anya announced. The number hit Ethan in the chest. It was over. The math was immutable. He had lost. He started to lower his paddle, the weight of failure already crushing him, but as his arm fell, his eyes met Anya across the glittering distance. She wasn't looking at the CEO. She was looking straight at him, and in her expression was not pity, but a sudden, dawning recognition. She had seen his name on the guest list, connected to the construction firm. She had seen the way he stood, the way he dressed. And in that moment, she understood exactly what was happening in a way the man in the tuxedo never would. Her gaze held his. The gavel was poised in her hand. 60,000 going once. Ethan's mind was blank white noise. Then it filled with a single image. Chloe at the kitchen table, tears of frustration tracking through the freckles on her nose as she pushed her book away. The sound of her saying, "I'm stupid, Daddy." Going twice. His hand, acting on an impulse deeper than logic, shot back into the air. 65, he said, the words raw. A gasp, actual and audible, swept the room. The CEO stood up, turning fully now, his face a mask of bewildered indignation. He stared at the carpenter in work boots at the back of his own party. And Anya, the auctioneer, whose job was to be a neutral conduit for money, did something she had never done in 15 years. She lowered her gavel and spoke directly to the man in the tuxedo, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden hush. "Sir," she said, "I think you should know. The gentleman bidding against you, his daughter, is one of the 12 children in that program." She let the sentence hang in the crystal-lit air. The entire gala froze, and in that suspended silence, With every elite face turned his way, Ethan Cole braced for the final, bankrupting blow. In the absolute quiet, the CEO, a man named Robert Vance, didn't look at Ethan. He stared at the auctioneer, Anya, his expression shifting from indignation to something colder, more calculating. The disclosure was a breach of protocol, an emotional injection into a purely financial transaction. He slowly lowered his paddle, placing it flat on the linen tablecloth as if laying down a weapon. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Anya swallowed, the weight of her own actions settling on her, but her voice, when it came, was firm. 65,000 going once, going twice. The gavel fell with a sound like a bone cracking. Sold to Paddle 117 for $65,000. There was no applause, just a murmur, a rustle of fabric as hundreds of people turned to watch the man at the back. Ethan stood frozen, the numbered card still held aloft in a hand gone numb. A young woman in a black suit materialized beside him, a clipboard in her hands. "Sir, if you'd come with me to complete the paperwork." Her smile was professional, but her eyes were wide. He was led through a service corridor, away from the ballroom's glare, into a small, windowless office smelling of old paper and carpet cleaner. The reality descended like a physical force. $65,000. He had just spent $65,000. The number echoed in the hollow space where his savings used to be. He signed the forms in a daze, his signature looking like a stranger's. He provided his driver's license. The woman assured him wire instructions would be emailed by morning. When he stumbled back out into the cool night air of the hotel's service entrance, his truck looked like a relic from a different century. His phone, silenced in his pocket, was blinking with a single missed call from his brother, Marcus, who was watching Chloe. No messages. The world outside the ballroom had not changed, but his had just been emptied. He drove home on autopilot. The familiar streets seemed alien, the streetlights judging. He walked into his small, darkened house just after 11. Marcus was asleep on the couch, the blue light of a muted infomercial playing across his face. Ethan checked on Chloe, sleeping peacefully, a threadbare stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the steady rise and fall of her blankets, trying to connect this quiet child to the seismic financial shift he had just caused. The fear was a live wire in his gut. What have I done? He didn't sleep. He made coffee at 4 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table, the quiet hum of the refrigerator his only company. He opened his banking app on his phone. The balance, which had been a comforting, solid block of numbers, now read $412.18. The pending transaction for $65,000 was already there, a black line through his security. He put the phone face down on the table. At 6:15, his phone buzzed. Not Marcus. A number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text from the same number lit up the screen. "Ethan, it's Principal Alvarez. Please call me as soon as you can." When he called her back, her voice was a mixture of awe and panic. "Ethan, my God, I just got a call from the Lambert Foundation. I saw the amount. Is this real?" "It's real," he said, his voice gravel. "The program is funded for a full year. The foundation is there in shock, but Ethan, the local news picked it up. Someone in that room posted about it. It's starting to get shared." By 7 a.m., it was on the local news website. A short, factual blurb, "Mystery bidder outbids CEO for school program." By 8, it had a hashtag, #outbid CEO. A blurry, zoomed-in photo of him from the back of the room, his paddle raised, was circulating. By 9, his truck was identified in the hotel parking lot by someone online, and with it his name, Ethan Cole, carpenter, single father. The first camera crew arrived at his job site at 10:30. He was high on scaffolding, installing fascia board, when a white van with a satellite dish pulled up. His foreman, Leo, a man built like a barrel with a heart just as solid, walked over, had a brief, animated conversation, and pointed firmly back toward the road. The van left, but Leo walked over to the scaffold and looked up. "You want to talk about it, Ethan?" "No," Ethan said, not looking down. "Didn't think so. You finish that north corner. I'll handle the gate crashers." But the gate crashers weren't just media. At noon, his phone buzzed with an email. The subject line, "Formal Inquiry, Lambert Foundation Gala, Lot 10." It was from a lawyer representing Robert Vance. The email was densely worded, but the core message was clear. Mr. Vance was considering the bid to be made under undue duress and highly irregular circumstances due to the auctioneer inappropriate interjection. They were reviewing options, including a challenge to the validity of the sale, and requested Ethan preserve all related documents. Ethan read it 3 times on the cracked screen of his phone, the sun beating down on his neck. Undue duress. He was being sued, or he was about to be, for winning an auction, for buying something he couldn't afford to save his daughter's chance to read. He drove to Maplewood Elementary after work, still in his dusty clothes. He needed to see Principal Alvarez to see the thing he had bought. The school was a low, brick building from the 60s. He was buzzed in and walked down quiet halls smelling of wax and disinfectant to her office. Maria Alvarez was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a permanent look of mild exhaustion. Her office was covered in children's drawings and piles of paperwork. When she saw him, she stood up quickly. "Ethan, come in, sit, my God." She pushed a box of tissues toward him as if he might cry. "I got a letter from a lawyer," he said flatly, not sitting. "From Vance's lawyer, they might try to undo it." Her face fell. "I was afraid of that. The foundation director called me. They're embarrassed and nervous. Vance is a major donor. He gave $100,000 last year. So they'll side with him." "I don't know," she said honestly, "but the money hasn't been transferred yet. There's a 72-hour window for the donor to initiate the wire. If they decide the bid is invalid, then it's gone." The sentence hung in the cluttered office. "Let me make a call," she said. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a number from memory. "Anya, it's Maria Alvarez. He's here with me now." She listened for a moment, her face grim. "I understand. Yes, okay." She hung up. "She's been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review, for violating donor privacy and influencing the bid." Ethan felt sick. He had gotten a woman fired, a woman who had tried to help. "But she gave me a message for you," Maria said, leaning forward. She said, "Tell him the rules are just the walls of the room. What happened in the center of the room was human, and human is harder to undo." Maria sighed. "Poetic, but the Foundation's board is having an emergency call tonight to decide whether to honor the sale." Ethan left the school feeling heavier than when he arrived. The program, the miracle, was a ghost. It existed in a legal limbo, contingent on the whims of wealthy people he had embarrassed. He picked up Chloe from aftercare. She ran to him, her backpack bouncing, unaware that her father was the topic of the city's dinner conversations. "Daddy, Mrs. Green said I get to start special reading tomorrow in the little room with the beanbags." He knelt, his knees popping, and pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like grape juice and playground. "That's great, Bug." "Is it because you bought it?" she asked, pulling back, her eyes serious. The question was so direct it winded him. "What do you mean?" "Jamie's mommy said her daddy saw it on the computer, that you bought my reading at a party." The world was so small. "Yeah," he whispered, "I did." She considered this, then wrapped her small arms around his neck again. "Thank you," she whispered into his collar. The 3 words were a blessing and a verdict. That night after Chloe was asleep, the story found its second wind. A local columnist, a woman known for her social justice pieces, published an op-ed titled "The Real Price of a Child's Future." She detailed the funding cuts to Maplewood, the average salary of a carpenter in the state, the net worth of Robert Vance's venture capital firm. She framed it not as a feel-good story, but as a damning indictment. "Last night in a ballroom," she wrote, "the free market met a father's love, and the free market blinked. But now the lawyers are arriving, because the one thing capital cannot tolerate is not losing, but being shown to be emotionally bankrupt." The piece went viral. By morning, #Stand with Ethan was trending locally. Donations started trickling into a GoFundMe set up by a Maplewood parent, aiming to give Ethan his safety net back. $50, $100, $300. The comments were a torrent of support, but also of rage, at the system, at Vance, at the sheer injustice of a man being punished for caring too much. Ethan saw none of it. He was at the hardware store at 7 a.m. buying 2x4s for a shed project when the store manager, an old family friend, came over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Just saw the news, son, that Vance fella, he held a press conference." Ethan's blood went cold. What did he say? "He's withdrawing his challenge," said after reflection and considering the broader community sentiment, he will not contest the bid. He wishes the school program every success. It should have felt like victory, but it felt like a trap. The tone, as reported, was magnanimous but cold. A CEO cutting his losses on a public relations disaster. The foundation board, released from the pressure, quickly announced they would fulfill the terms of the auction. The $65,000 was officially, irreversibly, gone from Ethan's account. But the story had its own momentum now. The national news picked it up. A morning talk show wanted an interview. A publishing house reached out about a possible book deal. Every ring of his phone was a fresh invasion. He stopped answering. He changed his number. He asked Principal Alvarez to be a shield for Chloe at school. And then 4 days after the gala, the second email arrived. This one was from the Internal Revenue Service. Its subject, examination of charitable contribution deduction, tax year. The body was a dense thicket of legal and accounting language, but the intent was clear. Donations over $50,000 triggered automatic review thresholds. His $65,000 charitable contribution, the one that had bankrupted him, was now being audited. The letter requested records, bank statements proving the source of funds, the auction paperwork, proof of the wire transfer. It ended with a chillingly polite line, "Please be advised that disallowance of the deduction may result in significant tax, liability, penalties, and interest." Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the letter trembling in his hand. He had naively assumed the tax deduction would offer some tiny relief, a fraction of the money back over time. Now, the government was questioning whether his life-altering sacrifice was even legitimate. If they disallowed it, he wouldn't just be broke. He would owe the IRS thousands more that he did not have. He was no longer just a viral story. He was a case file, a line item, a problem to be solved by accountants and lawyers, professionals he could never afford. The walls, as Anya had said, were closing in. And in the center of the room, all that was left was the terrifying human cost of his decision and a single, unanswerable question. How do you prove the value of a miracle to someone who only believes in numbers? Ethan showed the IRS letter to his brother, Marcus, who stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language, then said the only useful thing he'd said in weeks. "You need a lawyer who does this for free." But it wasn't a lawyer who called first. It was an accountant. Her name was Lin Chen, and she introduced herself as a tax specialist who had been following the story. She offered to review his case pro bono because, as she put it bluntly on the phone, the IRS auditing a charitable donation from a working person is obscene. It's also stupid. They'll lose, but we have to make sure they lose. She met him at a public library, a neutral, quiet space. Lin was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and carried a sense of contained fury. She spread copies of his bank statements, the auction paperwork, and the IRS letter on a study table. For an hour, she asked rapid-fire questions in a low voice, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. Where did the savings come from? Paycheck stubs. Had he ever been audited before? No. Did he have any other large assets? The truck, the house with a mortgage. Finally, she sat back. "Okay, the good news is your documentation is perfect. The source of funds is clear. The charitable receipt from the foundation is valid. This is a textbook audit trigger because of the amount, but on paper, you should be fine." Ethan felt a sliver of relief. Should be. "The bad news," Lynn said, leaning forward, "is that should be doesn't matter if they decide to disallow it anyway. And they might. Not because you're wrong, but because making you fight it costs you time and money you don't have. It's a pressure tactic. If you can't afford a prolonged battle, you might settle, agree to pay a portion just to make it go away. That's how they win." "I can't settle. I have $400. "I know, so we fight. But fighting means I need to prepare a full response. That takes my time, which I'm giving you. But if they escalate, and they might, we could be looking at tax court. That would require a lawyer, an expensive one." The sliver of relief vanished. "So I'm trapped." "You're in a system," Lynn corrected, not unkindly, "but systems have cracks, and public pressure is a pretty good crowbar." She tapped the GoFundMe page on her laptop, which had now grown to over $20,000 in small donations. "This is your leverage. The IRS hates bad press more than it hates losing a case. We'll use it." She advised him to make no public statements, but to authorize her to speak to the IRS on his behalf. He signed the forms right there at the library table. As he left, she said one more thing. "Ethan, they might look into your employment. Make sure you're current on everything. Any liens, any old debts. They'll use anything to paint a picture of financial instability." He drove straight to his foreman, Leo. "Leo, am I up to date? On everything, the books?" Leo looked at him, his face weary. "Ethan, your work is solid. Your time sheets are fine. But the company's books, the owner's been slow on some tax stuff. Not your problem. But if the IRS goes digging," he didn't finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Ethan's financial life was a house of cards in an earthquake zone. One tremor from the wrong direction and the whole thing could collapse, taking his job with it. The pressure was a constant, grinding noise in his skull. He worked, he came home, he made dinner for Chloe, he lay awake. The only peace was watching Chloe in her literacy sessions through the one-way window in the school corridor. He'd go on his lunch break, stand in the dim hall, and watch her with Mrs. Green. He saw her small finger tracing letters on a textured card. He saw her sound out a word, get it wrong, try again, and then the moment. The moment her face lit up with understanding, a huge, gap-toothed smile breaking through her concentration. That was the $65,000. That was the miracle. It was real. It was working. And then, the hammer fell from an unexpected direction. It was a Thursday. He was leaving the job site when his phone rang. It was Principal Alvarez, and she was crying. "Ethan, the district office, they're pulling the program." "What? Why? The money is there." "It's not about the money. It's about equity and access. They're saying using privately raised funds to create a specialized program for 12 children in one school violates district equity policies, that it creates a two-tier system. They're shutting it down at the end of the month. The money, they want to redirect it to a district-wide literacy initiative next fiscal year." Ethan leaned against his truck, the world tilting. He had fought CEOs, lawyers, the IRS. He had never considered the bureaucracy. "They can't do that. It was bought for Maplewood, for those kids." "They're saying they can. The donation was made to the district foundation, not the school directly. They control the allocation." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I fought. I screamed. They quoted policy documents at me." He drove to the district office, a bland, modern building. He didn't have an appointment. He walked into the reception area, still in his work clothes, and asked to see the superintendent. The receptionist, a young man with a headset, looked him up and down. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, tell him Ethan Cole is here, about the Maplewood Literacy Program." The young man spoke quietly into his headset, listened, then looked back at Ethan. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. The superintendent is in meetings all afternoon. You'll need to schedule through the community relations office." Ethan stood there, feeling the eyes of other office workers on him. He was a story to them, a problem, a disruption. He left. That night, the rage finally broke through the numbness. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, the glow of the screen the only light. He found the email for the local news reporter who had first broken the story. He typed a single, unadorned sentence. "The school district is canceling the program my daughter is in, the one I paid $65,000 for. Can you ask them why?" The reporter wrote back in 10 minutes, "Can I call you?" The story ran the next morning. Bidder's victory voided by bureaucracy. It included a statement from the district. "While we appreciate the extraordinary generosity, we must ensure all district resources are allocated equitably across all 28 schools." It was a masterclass in deflecting blame with virtuous language. The public reaction was nuclear. Parents from Maplewood organized. Parents from other asterisk schools who saw the injustice joined them. A protest was planned for the next school board meeting. The GoFundMe donations surged past $50,000. Comment sections erupted. The district's social media pages were flooded. The narrative had completely flipped. Now it wasn't a dad versus a CEO, it was a community versus a heartless, tone-deaf administration. Amid the chaos, a second email arrived from Lynn, the accountant. The subject line, Urgent Leon search result. His heart stopped. He opened it. Ethan, as part of the IRS response, I ran a standard Leon search. Something came up. It's not against you, it's against the Lambert Foundation. A federal tax lien for $200,000 filed 3 months ago. They have serious back taxes. He read the line again. The Lambert Foundation. The charity that had auctioned the lot, that was holding his $65,000, was itself in trouble with the IRS. Lynn's next sentence was colder. If the foundation is insolvent or has its assets seized, your donation could be caught in the receivership. The money for the program might not even be there for the district to redirect. It was a house of cards within a house of cards. Every layer of stability was an illusion. The charity was broke. The district was politically paralyzed. He was audited. And his daughter's future, the one thing he had bought at such cost, was evaporating into bureaucratic ether. The school board meeting was held in the Maplewood Gymnasium. It was packed, hot, loud. News cameras lined the back wall. Ethan stood at the side, leaning against the bleachers, unseen. He watched as parent after parent approached the microphone, voices trembling with anger, pleading for the program. They cited test scores, they cited their children's new confidence, they cited the specific, named gift that had made it possible. The board members, a row of uncomfortable-looking people behind a long table, listened with fixed, polite expressions. When the public comment period ended, the superintendent, a man with a carefully neutral demeanor, gave a prepared statement. He thanked the community for their passion, reiterated the district's commitment to equity, and announced a compromise. The program would be allowed to finish the current academic year using the existing funds. After that, the remaining money would be absorbed into the district's general fund. It was a stay of execution, not a pardon. The crowd erupted in boos. The gavel banged. Ethan turned and left, the noise fading behind him. He stood outside in the cool night air, feeling utterly defeated. He had spent everything, attracted every possible form of scrutiny and opposition, and all he had bought was 8 more months of help for his daughter. A temporary fix. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Anya, the auctioneer. I was fired today. Officially, I'd like to talk. I have information about Robert Vance. Meet me at the diner on Elm, please. He went. Anya was in a booth in the back, wearing a simple sweater, no emerald gown in sight. She looked tired, older. She pushed a cup of coffee toward him as he slid in. I'm sorry, she said first, for everything that's happened to you. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Why did you do it? He asked. Why say what you said? She stirred her coffee, not meeting his eye. Because I grew up in a house like yours. My dad was a mechanic. I know what that money meant. I saw Vance's face. He wasn't bidding to win the program. He was bidding to make a point, to own the room. When you outbid him, it became personal for him, not about the kids, about losing. She took a deep breath. That's the information, Vance. He's done this before, not with a school, but with small businesses. He targets things people are emotionally invested in, outbids them, then either jacks up the price or pulls out at the last second to crush them. It's a game. The foundation knew his reputation. They were thrilled he was bidding. They never thought he'd lose. Ethan felt a cold clarity. The CEO's initial bid wasn't charity. It was the first move in a cruel game. Ethan, by bidding back, had accidentally become a player. And when Anya revealed his motive, she turned Vance from a powerful donor into a cartoon villain. That's why he backed down publicly. The optics were toxic, but the damage was done. Why tell me this now? Ethan asked. Because you're still fighting, she said simply, and you should know what you're fighting. It's not just bureaucracy. It's a system that protects people like Vance and grinds up people like you and me. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Names, 2 small business owners he did this to. They might talk to you if you think it helps. He took the paper. What will you do? She gave a thin, resigned smile. I have a sister in Portland. Maybe start over. But first, I'm giving an interview to that reporter about Vance's pattern, about the foundation's shaky finances. If your story is going to burn, it might as well light up the things that deserve to burn. Ethan left the diner with the names in his pocket. The fight had changed shape again. It was no longer just about saving a program. It was about exposing the machinery that had tried to break him for daring to play the game by a different set of rules. He got in his truck and looked at the list. The first name was a woman who had lost her family's bakery. He started the engine. The path forward was no longer through pleading or protest. It was through revelation. And he had just been handed the first thread. The bakery was called the Rolling Pin, a small storefront with a cheerful awning, now darkened and empty, a for lease sign plastered across the window. The woman who answered the door of the nearby apartment was named Helen. In her 60s, with flour still seeming to dust her hands, she listened to Ethan's halting explanation on her doorstep, her eyes narrowing as he mentioned Robert Vance's name. "He wanted the building," she said, her voice flat. "Not the business, the building. My grandfather bought it in 1952. Vance offered to fund a renovation loan through his bank, made it sound like charity. Then at the last minute the terms changed. The interest was impossible. He foreclosed 6 months later, sold the building to a developer friend." She looked past Ethan at the empty shop. "He told me at the closing, sentimentality is a bad business model." She agreed to talk to the reporter. So did the second name on Anya's list, a man who lost his auto body shop in the same way. The story, when it broke, was no longer a local human interest piece. It was an investigation. Philanthropy or predation, the pattern of a donor. It wove together the bakery, the body shop, and the literacy program auction, painting Vance not as a ruthless capitalist, but as a manipulator who used charitable venues as hunting grounds. The article included the Lambert Foundation's tax liens questioning their due diligence. It quoted Anya, now publicly, on the culture of the fundraising gala. "We were stage managers for wealth," she said, "and sometimes the wrong person walks on stage." The public, already primed by Ethan's story, consumed this new narrative with outrage. Vance's company's social media was flooded. A planned business awards ceremony disinvited him. The state attorney general's office announced a review of the foreclosures mentioned in the article. It wasn't a legal earthquake, but it was a seismic shift in reputation. Vance disappeared from public view. The ripple effects were immediate. The Lambert Foundation, under dual pressures of scandal and insolvency, entered receivership. A court-appointed trustee began untangling its finances. Lynn, Ethan's accountant, filed a motion to have his $65,000 donation prioritized and released directly to the Maplewood program, arguing it was a restricted gift with a specific purpose. The trustee, wanting a clean, swift resolution, agreed. The money was placed in a protected escrow account, inaccessible to the district's general fund. It could only be used for the literacy program. The district's equity argument evaporated overnight. The money was now legally walled off, belonging to the program alone. Principal Alvarez called Ethan, her voice shaking with jubilant disbelief. "It's safe. It's irrevocable. The program is permanent as long as this money lasts." The IRS, as Lynn predicted, folded in the face of mounting public scrutiny. They sent a formal letter closing the audit with no change to Ethan's return. The deduction stood. He wouldn't owe a penny. The relief was so profound, it felt like a physical unclenching of muscles he'd forgotten were tight. The GoFundMe, fueled by the final acts of the drama, closed at $107,000. A note from the parent who organized it was simple: "For the safety net." Ethan stared at the number. It was more money than he'd ever had at once. He paid off his truck. He set up a proper college fund for Chloe. He put the rest in savings, the digital numbers a faint, glowing echo of the security he'd obliterated months before. He kept working for Leo. The normalcy of the job site, the weight of a hammer, the smell of sawdust, it was no longer a prison of scarcity, but a choice. Chloe finished first grade reading at grade level. The ceremony was in the school gym. She walked across the stage to get a certificate, not for perfect attendance or good citizenship, but for most tenacious reader. She beamed, holding the paper over her head. Ethan watched from the bleachers, his brother Marcus elbowing him in the ribs, both of them grinning like fools. A week later, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize. His stomach dropped, an old instinct, but it wasn't a threat, it was an offer. A community land trust, a non-profit that developed affordable housing, wanted to hire him as a construction supervisor. They followed his story. They liked how he worked. The salary was better. The benefits were solid. It was work that meant something. He took the job. The following autumn, a year after the gala, the Lambert Foundation's remaining assets were liquidated. Robert Vance was not charged criminally, but his company settled the Attorney General's review with a substantial financial payment and a promise of reformed lending practices. The news cycle moved on. Vance became a footnote, a cautionary tale in business ethics seminars. Ethan was painting the trim on his new house, the same house, just feeling newer when a car pulled up. It was Anya. She looked different, healthier, wearing jeans and a sweater. She moved back to the area, taken a job managing a community arts center. "I came to give you this," she said, handing him a folded check. "From the trustee's final disbursement. It's the interest that accrued on your donation while it was in escrow, $4,200. It's yours." He tried to refuse. She insisted. "Take it. Buy your daughter some books. Take a day off. It's not charity, it's just interest, literally." He laughed and took the check. They stood on the driveway for a moment in the crisp air. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did. It cost you." "It cost you more," she said, "and you didn't get your old life back. You got a different one," she smiled. "Seems like it fits better." He watched her drive away. That night, he read to Chloe from a chapter book, no pictures, just words. She followed along with her finger, sounding out the hard ones, getting most of them right. When she fell asleep, he went to the kitchen table where the IRS letter, the lawyer's threat, the district's notice, all now just wrinkled papers in a drawer. He took out the auction paddle, the laminated card number 117. He turned it over in his hands. The next morning, he drove to Maplewood. He didn't go to the office. He went to the literacy room. Mrs. Green was there, setting up for the day. He handed her the paddle. "I thought maybe you could hang this in here, for the kids. A reminder that this room, someone fought for it." Mrs. Green, a woman not prone to grand gestures, took it and nodded, her eyes bright. She taped it to the wall beside the alphabet chart. A strange artifact in a room of bright colors and beanbag chairs. A wooden paddle with a number, a receipt. The story, in the end, wasn't about a dramatic victory. It was about a series of small, stubborn defenses. He defended the bid. Then he defended the deduction. Then he defended the money itself from the bureaucracy. Then he helped expose the rot in the system that had tried to exploit his love for his child. There was no single villain vanquished, but a balance restored, unevenly, imperfectly. At the heart of it, beneath the news stories and the legal motions and the checks, was a simple transaction. A man exchanged every dollar he had for the sound of his daughter's voice, reading. And in the end, despite everything, he found that the market, the bureaucracy, the whole cold machinery of the world had no true counter for that currency. It could harass it, audit it, threaten it, and redirect it. But it could not devalue it. The worth was fixed. The deal was done. Ethan Cole walked out of the school into the autumn light. His phone buzzed, a text from his new foreman about a materials delivery. His truck, now paid for, started with a clean rumble. At home, there was a mortgage, a savings account, a child who could read, and the quiet, unspectacular piece of a future that was no longer something to be feared, but simply lived. One word, one day, one paycheck at a time. The road ahead was just a road. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. We tell stories about underdogs for a reason, not just because we want to see them win, but because we need to remember that the ground beneath the giants isn't as solid as it looks. Ethan Cole's story was never just about a bid. It was a stress test, a single point of pressure applied to the intersection of charity, class, education, and justice, and at that point, the entire structure groaned. It revealed that philanthropy often has a dress code, and that the love of a parent can be audited as a financial anomaly. It showed that systems designed for efficiency will always view a targeted miracle as an administrative problem. But it also showed something else, that public attention, once focused, can become a tool as precise as any lawyer's letter. That community anger can be a more potent force than policy. And that sometimes, the most radical act is not a grand gesture, but a simple, stubborn refusal to accept that something priceless has no price. The paddle on the wall in that literacy room is more than a souvenir. It's a fossil, evidence of a collision between two different worlds of value. In one world, value is measured in returns, in optics, in strategic generosity. In the other, it is measured in the quiet sound of a child conquering a sentence. The auction was the rare moment those two currencies were forced to trade directly, and for all the chaos that followed, the exchange rate held. Ethan didn't change the system. He doesn't run for office. He doesn't start a foundation. He goes to work, he raises his daughter, he paints his trim. The system, briefly inflamed, settled back into its grooves, but it was marked, scuffed. The next person who stands in a similar room, who feels that same desperate love, might remember this. They might raise their hand a little sooner, a little steadier, knowing the ground has been tested. The true legacy isn't a reformed charity sector or a new education law. It's a room full of children who can read because one father on one night decided that his definition of worth was the only one that mattered. It's a reminder that the most powerful bids we make in this life aren't for experiences or status, but for futures. And those bids are placed not with money, but with time, with attention, with the exhausting, beautiful work of caring more than seems reasonable. So the next time you see a story about an underdog, look past the headline. Look for the point of pressure. Look for the quiet collision of values, and ask yourself what currency you're trading in and what you're really willing to spend to protect what you love. The auction is always happening. The question is just whether you've decided what your lot is worth. If you found a different kind of value in this story, consider subscribing. More narratives that examine the hidden architecture of our everyday lives are waiting for you. Thanks for listening.